Hello and welcome to the Outlaws podcast with Kate and Shayla for professionals unlearning the rules of work and life. Ditch the shoulds and build what fits. This week we're talking to a GP and it's so good to finally have someone from the health professions joining us.
Dr Emily Amos spent 15 years as a doctor. She was the kind of GP everyone hopes to find. Empathetic, thoughtful, the one who really listens. But behind that was a woman giving her all to others, but not to herself. When she hit burnout, everything stopped. The doctor light went out. And in that pause, she began to rebuild, not just her career, but her sense of self.
Now Emily works at the intersection of medicine, mindfulness and self-awareness, helping others move beyond surface-level well-being to create real, sustainable change. Dr Emily Amos, welcome to Outlaws. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
We're so excited to have a doctor, aren't we, Kate?
I know, a non-lawyer. Very exciting. So out meds we are. This is
out meds today.
So tell us about you, Emily. You used to be a GP. I know you're not practicing as a GP anymore, but tell us a little bit about how you got into medicine, why you decided to be a doctor in the first place.
So I think I have a bit of an atypical path into medicine in that I didn't grow up thinking I want to be a doctor. And in some ways, perhaps I possibly fell into medicine as much as you can do that into a medical degree. I originally started studying a psychology degree and I was living in college and I was watching all my friends go off to their anatomy labs thinking, oh gosh, that looks like fun. So I decided I'd sit the UMAT and it did all right on that and got into medicine. And so as I was progressing through my medical degree, I think I obviously had that sort of drive towards whole person care that really probably came from that beginning. So that kept me going through my medical degree after I graduated. And then in my early years, I decided that general practice was the place for me. And I think that came from those beginnings more than anything else.
I can see that actually, that an interest in psychology and medicine would make GP general practice a fairly good fit, I think, because that's such an important skill.
Yeah, and I think what a lot of people underestimate is how much of general practice actually is psychological medicine. There's a common misconception in the broader population about what general practice is, and something that I often find myself ranting about very passionately because I am a true generalist in every sense of the word. And general practice really encompasses that whole person care. So we're not just people who write referrals and scripts and send people everywhere else. There's actually a lot of care that's done in general practice. And in fact, a lot of general practice isn't pathology. A lot of general practice is just life. It's walking with your patients through the messiness of life. And I think that's such an undervalued skill in our healthcare system because really there's a lot of people with a lot of messiness that isn't actually sickness or ill health. And that's what general practice just does so beautifully and holds so well.
Yeah, for sure.
And so tell me about university and those years immediately following university. I mean, it's hard to get a medical degree and to then go on and do all the bits after that, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it's definitely hard, and I teach medical students. I have done for the last 8 or 9 years, and so I don't underestimate what that process is. But when I think back, and it's interesting these last few years learning more about myself and the way my brain works and the things that really get me ticking. I've realised that I was always a bit of an all-rounder. And the problem with being a perpetual all-rounder who can achieve sort of most things I set my mind to was that I never really appreciated what I could do. I just kept plodding along and didn't really think too much about it. And I think that through university and certainly coming after university, I didn't really stop to smell the roses or appreciate what my brain was doing for me and what I was able to do for myself. I just kept setting these arbitrary goalposts for myself that I could never reach because I kept moving them. And that propelled me through medicine, which is great. You know, it got me through a medical degree. But the things that happened after, and I'm sure these are things that we'll explore around burnout and where I got to, really probably the seeds were planted long ago, and these seeds of unrelenting standards and perfectionism were always there throughout my high schooling, throughout my university as well.
Shayla and I can't relate to that at all.
I'm
So
sure there's a
what
lot
a
of people
shame.
who can relate to that.
So you ended up as a GP, and so what sort of work did you do, and or can you tell us what a typical week looked like for you as a GP?
Oh, there is no typical week in general
Right.
practice.
Yeah,
It's
right.
it really is the beauty of general practice. There's no typical week. But I think another thing that obviously with the benefit of hindsight I see in myself is that I had this perpetual tendency of enjoying something or finding something fascinating, studying it to the nth degree and turning it into a job. So when I went through general practice, I had my kids. So my children were young as I went through the training program. And even before I'd finished the GP training program, I had struggled to breastfeed my oldest child. And so I thought, well, I didn't have the help that I needed at that point in time. I'll go and become a lactation consultant. So I did that for a few years and I studied and got my international board certification in lactation consultancy. And then by the time I'd fellowed in general practice, I'd started to pick up and establish a practice in breastfeeding medicine. And 10
Wow.
years ago, there wasn't a lot of doctors who were working in the field of breastfeeding
Mm.
medicine as a distinct sort of entity from lactation consultancy, really looking at the medical management of breastfeeding for breastfeeding parents and the entire family. So again, it's coming back to this idea of whole person care and
Yeah.
psychological medicine as well. So I
Yeah.
set up a practice working with new parents and working in that space of breastfeeding medicine, and that took me to sort of about 2019. By that stage, my kids were getting a little bit older. I had set up my own practice. I was busy, 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 and in hindsight, I really didn't notice at the time the perpetual momentum that took me to that point. I mean, as I'm saying to you, it's so
Yeah.
flipping obvious
Yeah.
that I just ran on this concoction of adrenaline and cortisol for most of my adult life by that
Yeah.
stage. And so now when I look back, it's not at all surprising that I hit June of 2019 and absolutely hit a wall. And now when I look back, I think the markers were all there,
Right.
but I can say hand on heart, I didn't know that I was going to burn out. I did not know that I was heading for that sort of collapse. And in fact, I still prided myself on helping other people to avoid burnout. And particularly in that new parent space, I was working with a really high touch, labor intensive sort of patient cohort. But what I was teaching them were the skills that I really needed to be used as well.
Yeah.
And that sort of changed the trajectory of my professional life really simply.
It's so interesting that that's something obviously that people would have come to you with burnout, right? You know what all the signs are, and yet for whatever reason you weren't able to see that in yourself. Do you have a sense of why?
Fair dose of hubris, I think. But I think it's very easy to fix something in someone else. I think
Mm,
about this even just in my marriage. I can see things when I'm like, oh, you need to do this. And you think you have to
mm,
pull yourself up and go, actually, I need to do that too. It's
mm.
so much easier to find these things in other people. And I think medicine as a field and a lot of the helping and healing professions perhaps are similar, that we are drawn to these professions with a desire to help others. And the problem with this sort of sense of altruism is that altruism in the absence of self-awareness is just self-sacrifice. So we end up putting everything on
Oh,
on
That's nice. Hang
I
on.
was gonna say,
We need
write
to
that
do that
down.
again.
Write that down.
Say that
That
one again. That is very good.
whoa.
this one is sort of the catchphrase of my life these days, but altruism in the absence of self-awareness is self-sacrifice.
Wow, that's a great one. Yeah. Yeah.
And this
Yeah.
is something that I had to learn the very hard way, that actually what I thought was me being altruistic and giving and caring wasn't. I mean, it certainly, I was doing wonderful things and I was helping other people, but I was doing it at a cost to myself that I wasn't aware of at the time.
Mm,
And there's a lot of evidence around the experience and the practice of empathy and these different elements of empathy and how we transform that to a more active process of compassion. But one of those elements of empathy is empathic distress, where when we're in this sort of zone of empathic distress, our actions to support others, that pro-social behavior, is likely not so much to be a desire to help others, but more so from a desire to alleviate negative arousal in ourselves. So I didn't want to feel bad for not helping others. So
Mm.
it's a really subtle difference. And outwardly, the behavior is the same. You still help others,
Right.
but it's the motivating force that really changes. And for me, that paved the way towards burnout. It became less about helping others and more about not feeling like I wasn't helping others enough. So that
Yeah.
guilt and shame was what was driving the behavior. And what I didn't realize was that actually was like turning the nitro on the engine. It propelled me there even quicker when I look
Yeah.
back. And that collapse really came from just not being aware of that process, that I was still outwardly helping others. And the really cruel irony of that is that in the helping and healing professions, that behavior of helping others and serving others, it attracts external validation and reward. So the more you do it, the more validation you get. And the cruel irony part is that as you pick up the pace and do more of it, bend over backwards, fit more patients in, do more things in your unpaid work, in your overtime, all these things that you do outwardly get appreciated by the patient group, by colleagues, and so there's this sick validation as you're running yourself into the ground, almost literally running yourself into the ground. And it just becomes a really self-perpetuating sort of process. So burnout's the pretty obvious conclusion that it comes to. And I'm just so grateful that for me, what burnout looked like was a physical collapse. My body gave out. It could have been any number of other things. But for me, it was a body that completely, literally said, I can't get outside my front door. I had a series of panic attacks that just was so debilitating. The final one came. So I had this sort of lead up. I talk about burnout like it's one day. But actually, obviously, it was months, years, all these tiny steps. But the one day for me came after I'd had a series of panic attacks that I thought, well, okay, that's a panic attack. I know what that is. I'll book in some time off. And I had patients booked in for 3 weeks because there was no one else doing the breastfeeding medicine work near me. I didn't want to let anyone down. I thought, okay, I'll book in a couple of days off in 3 weeks' time as I'm having these escalating panic attacks. And then I ended up having I had a panic attack while I was at a friend's 40th birthday. And it was this really, really awful sort of dissociative sense of being so alone, yet surrounded by so many people that I knew and loved. But that sense of aloneness is suffocating. And it wasn't so much the heart racing, the breathlessness. It was a really, really suffocating sense of just absolute aloneness and loneliness and heartbreaking. Like it was an awful feeling.
Yeah.
And of course I thought, oh, well, maybe I should go and see someone. Maybe I should. And so I started to do these little tidbits of maybe I should start looking after myself. And then eventually I sort of hobbled through a week or so until there was Thursday morning. I had the kids ready for school. They were in their uniforms. And I remember the thought that triggered it. I looked at my appointment book for the day ahead, and there was just some things coming up that I'd really been dreading. And when I saw them there, the thought that kicked into my brain was this realization that everything that I was trying to outpace, everything that I was trying to run away from, wasn't even outside my door. It was, if I called in sick or I didn't go out, I thought I can't actually run away from it. It's nothing that I'm really running away from is even outside my door. It's
The
in
call
here.
coming from inside the house.
And that I literally was inside my front door. I had a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, and I just dropped to the ground, and I was in absolute tears, and the kids were in tears, and that realization that I could not outpace myself anymore. There was nowhere I could go. And I think my medical mind kicked in, I think I just want to be sedated. I wanted peace that I couldn't find. And even the idea of being admitted to a psychiatric ward or something, which crossed my mind, I thought, even if they close the door, it's still everything that I'm trying to escape from comes in there with me. And that just floored me. And that panic attack was the one that literally stopped me from getting out my front door. And so I managed to call my sister. She came and picked up the kids. She called my mum. My mum came and managed to get me in to see my GP. And she took one look at me and said, "Oh, something's really wrong, isn't it?" I said, "Yeah." And that was just this absolute falling off a cliff. Obviously, I didn't go into work that day. I didn't go into work at all for another 6 months in the end. But it was then that things just had to start happening for me. I was no longer capable of micromanaging my burnout. There was nothing I could do. I'd pushed this system too far, and then that was when everyone had to start coming in around me and booking appointments and feeding me and putting me to bed, and I just couldn't do anything for myself for that.
Were people around you surprised? Or, I mean, you've obviously been like this incredibly, what you were achieving from an external perspective. Did it come as a shock to people, or were there sort of people saying, you know what, I've been worried about you? Or
No, it came as a shock. Even
Yeah.
my husband was, and he says to me now, he was really scared
Wow.
because everyone around me was used to seeing me as someone who could do anything. You know, I was good under pressure, great in a crisis. And it's that perpetual, you know, the swan with the legs paddling. And that is by my nature, that is who I am. It is still who I am. And I've had to learn how to hold that part of me and that awareness with respect and reverence. But that meant that when the wheels fell off, I had pushed it so far that my body could no longer compensate in the way that everyone around me had ever known me to compensate. So it was a shock. It was a shock for me, and it was definitely a shock for people who cared about me as well.
So 6 months then, can you talk us through what that 6 months looked like? I don't know. I mean, again, I'm sure it's very sort of painful to go through it again and put yourself back in that place. So please just share what you feel comfortable with. But
it's so I wasn't kind to myself even at that of my lowest ebb, you know. To look back now with the eyes and the knowledge that I have, I just feel so much compassion for that person who is sort of dragging her tired body through burnout. Because what I did was I said, okay, I'll take a week or two off. And I mean, to think about this now and think this was a dark night of the soul. I had never known myself to not be able to force myself out the front door to do something. It was just, in all my years, not something I was familiar with. I took a couple of weeks off, and I was meeting with my GP. I already had a psychologist. So I was meeting with them. And because they knew me, because I had a relationship with them, they were gentle with me, and they didn't just say, you need to take 6 months off. I think they knew me well enough to say, okay. They just sort of held me through this as I came to the gradual realization of what had to happen, which was I was so fortunate to have the sort of support around me that I had. And that, I think, was really important in the trajectory that I had. But if I could change one thing, it would have been at that point, which was my lowest ebb, to have given myself more breathing space than having this, I'll give myself 2 weeks and then get to the end of 2 weeks and have a panic attack at the thought of going back. And then I'll give myself 2 weeks. And so I kept doing that. And then, I gradually make the intervals a little bit bigger. And I had a beautiful practice manager who came to see me at the 4-week mark, I think it was. And she just took one look at me. She came to see me to ask about the plan to come back and sort of reintegrate. She took one look at me and she said, you're not coming back. I'm not letting you come back.
Right. Wow.
So I think it did take me a while after that sort of initial shock to realize what other people could see so readily in those early days.
Yeah. Because you're clearly resisting it, right? You're not. Yeah. Yeah.
What I was thinking as you were saying that is that swan thing. That so much of our identity is caught up in being capable and being the one who can be relied upon. And I think that that's what's so difficult when you get to that point, sort of admitting defeat. I think that probably for a while I knew that, well, certainly others were telling me, and I think probably deep down I knew that this was going to end badly. But I just, everyone's relying on you. who was going to do it if you weren't going to do it. I think that quote that you gave
Mm.
before um, makes a lot of sense to me. Constantly saying yes to everyone else, but never really yes to yourself. So I'm just really interested in your thoughts on how much of your identity was caught up in being the capable one, and whether or not you felt that made it more difficult to kind of give in to this.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I prided myself on helping other people to deal with stress and
Yeah,
burnout and
exactly.
depression and
Right.
anxiety. And I know that I have always done a very good job of that. So there is that sense of failure in admitting that I couldn't do that for myself at that point in time, or perceived failure at least. But
Yeah.
I guess the identity side of things is also an interesting one, because what I remember so distinctly in the 6 months to 12 months in the lead up to that point was how many times I tried to sort of consider doing something different,
Mm,
slowing down.
Right.
And I know that the voice in my head, I know it because it's my voice, would say, no, there is no other way. And if
yeah.
someone had a suggestion, and I could very, very convincingly to myself say, no, you don't understand because you're not a doctor, or you're not
Mhm.
a mum, or you're not this. There was always a way that my brain could say, whatever that suggestion is, it's not. I've thought about everything and I'm doing it the only way. So that fixed mindset
Mm,
was just so, it's so obvious in hindsight, but it did not feel obvious how much more fixed my mindset was getting the closer I got to
mm,
burnout. And the ironic
mm.
thing of saying,
Right.
I couldn't step back, I couldn't work less, I couldn't change where the kids go to school, I couldn't do all these things. That day, that line in the sand where everything changed, all the things I said couldn't happen happened.
Yeah,
I didn't come into work,
exactly.
so the patients found someone else. I
Yeah.
didn't, we had the kids in before and after school care, and they were going to the ELC because I needed to work more, so I needed the bigger hours, and bang, that was switched into community kinder. I didn't have before and after school care.
I know.
Everything in our budget that I thought was absolutely immovable was gone as our budget was slashed, because necessity was the mother of invention, and everything I
Right.
said couldn't happen happened in the space of a
Mm.
week or two.
So true. I can't even tell you how much I agree with all of that. And you hear it all the time. I had a conversation with my doctor and she said, you should have 6 months off. That's what people do when they're feeling like you are. And I said, I don't know what people you hang around with, but no one that I know
God,
does
no one.
that.
I didn't even have. I had a few months off when I had each of my kids. I had longer off to burn out than I did to have either of my kids.
Same. Yeah. Do you think so? Going back to these caring professions, and I think for me, this was a big part of, how I exist in life and how I work. I don't blame this on my workplace. My workplace were actually incredible. I do think there's a whole heap of structural issues, though, and I'm really interested in what you think the practice of medicine and the sort of medical profession, how that fed into what happened to you.
It's something I've reflected a lot on, actually, because when you look at the definition of burnout, and it's an occupational phenomenon.
Mm,
And I mean, there's very few things that I would offer to take on the DSM about, or no, it's not even DSM, it's the International Classifications of Disease for burnout. This is one of them, because when we talk about burnout as purely being an occupational phenomenon, I think by the time someone is showing signs of burnout in their work, there have been so many things that have suffered in the behind the scenes of their
yeah.
life
Right.
before all these problems are starting to manifest in someone's job. And so when I think about burnout as a manifestation of poorly managed workplace stress, if we're going with the ICD definition, I mean, I was a GP, so I was a sole trader. I was in charge of my own hours. I could dictate how I worked. I didn't have sort of the oversight of restricted shifts or night shifts. I didn't have as an organisation or as a large employer above me. So by all standards, I shouldn't have had a lot of the traditional workplace
Yeah.
stress elements that you see in other areas of healthcare. But then when I think about the broader sort of population of healthcare professionals, medicine, I think it does attract a certain personality type. And as we mentioned before, I think a lot of us that are attracted to these helping and healing professions do perhaps have this element of altruism. But in the absence of self-awareness, that very same thing that
Right.
pulls us into the profession can be our undoing. So I think that what I needed in hindsight was I needed the sort of professional supervision or coaching that now is something I really advocate for. And I think there's a lot of people in those helping and healing professions who could really benefit from having a safe container or a one-on-one relationship to explore why it is we get called to healthcare, to these helping and healing professions to start with, and whether it is, natural aptitude, whether it is professional interest, whether it's curiosity, whatever it is. I think that there is an element of us needing to unpack some of those motivations, and that actually forms part of the workplace stress, so to speak, that
Right.
perhaps I agree with the ICD definition that maybe there are elements of workplace stress within healthcare that aren't about the rostering or the night shifts or the employers. There's elements of workplace stress within healthcare that might be about the personality types that are drawn to healthcare to start with, and how those personalities interact within the really high stress, high demand environment of healthcare itself. So it's slightly more nuanced than just that really static definition of poorly managed workplace stress.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, 100%. And I think that's true for law as well, don't you think, Kate? Like it's a particular
Absolutely.
particular personality
Yeah.
type.
Yeah. Well, I would say to the students too, because I teach in higher ed and they always think they're the only ones like that. But then I would often will say, welcome to Overthinkers Anonymous, and they're like, oh, it's not just me then. It's like, no.
No, we get drawn to like-minded people. So it makes sense that people with similar dispositions and personality traits might be drawn to certain professions.
Yeah.
And that realization that, and because I teach, as I said, medical students, that in the nicest possible way, we're not that special. When you put yourself in a profession of like-minded individuals, those things that you might be struggling with, there's chances are you're actually amongst kindred spirits.
And do you think, is it the same as in our profession where people don't talk about it? There's sort of, you don't talk about the fact that you're not traveling too well. You just push through, there's sort of this don't show any weakness. And as soon as you start digging beneath the surface, we were talking about this with Henry Nelson Case, weren't we, Kate? Around this idea of, he's a lawyer, and he was saying, he was looking around and going, oh, everyone else seems to be fine. Why is everyone else fine and I'm not fine? I therefore can't possibly say anything about the fact that I'm not feeling fine. Do you think it's the same in medicine?
Oh, yes, definitely.
Yeah.
And I don't want to fall into the trap of generalizing, but I do think that for a lot of people who are used to being quite high achieving and being able to do anything they set their mind to, regardless of what profession that puts you in, I think the idea of not being able to keep up, so to speak, is quite an identity crisis in a way. I don't think I really knew how to be that vulnerable back then. This is something that I learnt from being forced into that state of total vulnerability where I was a baby again. I needed taking care of in a way that I just hadn't ever experienced in my adult life. I had been a hyper independent, high achieving person. So that was a bitter pill to swallow. But it was, I think for me, it was something that, to be honest, I probably had to learn that way. I don't know that I would have learnt it any other way, that lesson of how to accept help, how to be vulnerable, and they're not failings, but how to see that common humanity in the fact that, you know what, if I'm struggling with this in the nicest possible way, I can't be that special. There has to be someone else. And this is the essence of common humanity, which is that foundation of self-compassion practice, that for every single thing that we ever experience as a human, you'd have to be pretty arrogant to think that no other human on the face of this earth has ever experienced something similar. Everything that I experience, everything that you experience, they are uniquely human experiences. There will be someone on the face of this earth chances are maybe a couple of people on the face of this earth
Mhm.
who has had the same experience, and really learning that lesson, that sense of common humanity. That to me it was a lesson that I wouldn't wish burnout on anyone, but I'd personally do it again if I had to learn that lesson.
Right.
Mm. Yeah, wow. And so you've got a company, I think, called Wholehearted Medicine. Is that what it's called? Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that and how you got to there, I guess. What was the pathway
Mm.
to getting to there?
So ironically, as I burnt out, I was actually doing my yoga teacher training,
Oh
which
gosh.
may or may not have
I was
tipped
going to
me
say,
over the edge. Who knows?
the irony.
Well, I did mention I had this tendency of enjoying something or having trouble with something, taking it to the nth degree and turning it into a job. Well, I was in the process of turning my love of yoga into a job as I burnt myself out. And that to me was a really interesting process, because what I learnt, even in that short training, I mean, compared to the years of training I'd gone through to be a GP by that point, a 200-hour yoga teacher training is a drop in the ocean.
Yeah.
And yet one of the first teachings, and for just about every teaching thereafter, was embedded the importance of practitioner well-being, that you teach others, you share with others the philosophy and practice of yoga from your embodied practice. So you need to take care of yourself as a practitioner,
Right.
so that you can support others. And for me, that was just a bit of a light bulb moment, because I thought, I've spent a lot of time studying by this stage,
Mm.
15 or more years, and I don't remember at any point practitioner well-being being something that was told to me or taught to me or supported as being important.
Mm.
You know, we were taught, I was filled with knowledge by this stage and skills. I had had hundreds of thousands of dollars of training invested in me. And yet there was zero investment in the vessel that held all that education.
Yeah, wow.
Wow. Right. God, that's another powerful statement too, right? When you put
Very.
it in those terms, got hundreds of thousands, you're right, and yet $0 in a way.
Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah,
mm,
what a great way to put it.
mm.
And then this is the same for all. I mean, when you think about the training to become a doctor, it is hundreds of thousands of dollars. It is valuable content.
Mm.
You would not put that on a rickety little boat and send it into the ocean.
Mm.
We need to invest in the vessel if we are going to invest so heavily in the contents of the vessel. It's so counterintuitive, the
Yeah.
way that modern healthcare is set up.
Mm.
And as I watched, as I had this realization, and I sort of started to get to the point where obviously I was thinking I'll return to work, everything's sort of feeling a bit better. And then I'm getting to sort of early 2020, having these thoughts that I'll go back to my breastfeeding medicine. I've done all this work. I've had these realizations. I can go back. And of course, we know what happened in early 2020. And
Mm.
as I'm looking left and right, I'm thinking, I've done a lot of work to be able to be standing upright right now. I don't think it's a good idea for me to jump straight back in where I was. I'm looking at the landscape, and there was an immense amount of guilt that I had to process at that point, as someone who was a trained healthcare professional watching a literal pandemic unfold. This is the sort of thing that most of us will see once in a career, if that.
Yeah.
Watching that unfold, but then also having this really unique perspective of the behind the curtain, watching my friends and colleagues and realizing that they were suffering and they were burning out at such an alarming rate. And all the sort of media coverage it was great. We're talking about healthcare heroes, but when you put healthcare professionals on a pedestal like that, it just tends to dehumanize them even more. And so what I was watching was this expedited process of burnout in my friends and colleagues. But there was this sort of societal understanding that we need to start thinking about the well-being of healthcare professionals in a way that we haven't before. So my brain was ticking over and thinking, okay, this is a really unique time. And I've had this experience and I've got these skills, I've been teaching mindfulness for many years. And again, ironic that I think that put the burnout off for me for a long time. And my lesson
Right.
was you can't just yoga or mindfulness your way out of burnout. The
Mm.
more you try to do it, the
Another
more
good
you.
quote.
Yeah.
But that's so. By this stage, I'm a GP. I'm a registered meditation teacher, registered yoga teacher, and I had this really significant personal experience, and obviously a lot of professional experience with psychological medicine. And all of this is coming together, and I thought, okay, I've got to do something. I can't just sit back and watch as this unfolds. So what I did was I created a curriculum, knew that healthcare professionals, if they had a brain like mine, love to learn. So how could I really shoot fish in a barrel, so to speak? How could I get them? It had to make it in that vessel of learning, because that was the way in. And we have to do 50 hours a year of continuing professional development. So there's this stick that keeps our registration going. How can I incentivize this? Well, I decided I was going to run this education in a retreat format. There's my carrot. So I combined my experience of running yoga, or running and attending yoga retreats, and I brought this in with all the teaching experience and all that sort of general practice, psychological medicine, lifestyle medicine experience, and created this sort of this model of educational retreats within a framework of accredited continuing professional development for doctors. And that was wholehearted medicine. So that was end of 2020. We ran our first retreat in 2021. We've had over 400 doctors come through in the last 5 years. We were the Victorian State finalist for the Telstra Best of Business Awards this year for championing health, and last year for outstanding growth. So it's definitely something that has been helpful, I hope, but has picked up momentum. And I think it's because it's needed. I mean, it just intuitively, we know this is so needed that I can't, in the nicest possible way, I couldn't be that special. There had to be more of me. And it turns out there's lots more of me.
Yeah. And I'm sure the work that you're doing is actually hopefully getting to people, getting that message across before they hit the point that you hit. For people listening, how do you think we can get sort of high achieving professionals or high achieving people generally, how can we get them to see rest or prioritizing oneself as essential rather than indulgent? Because I think that still seems to be, the dominant discourse around it. It shouldn't be. I hope it's changing, but that no, I can push through. And I love what you said too about the investment in. You can't put that kind of training into a rickety boat and send it out on the ocean. But how can we get that across, do you think?
This is my passion now, definitely, from starting wholehearted medicine with this desire to help people who are at the point or near the point I was. There came the point where I had this same realization, Kate, where it's that we can't just keep putting ambulances at the bottom of the hill. We do need to have some sort of training and awareness pointed at being much more proactive and saying, okay, well, it may not be that we can say to young people at university, think about your personality and what that's going to, because there is an element of life wisdom that I think comes into it. But I think exactly what we're doing here and what a lot of people are doing in their own way, normalizing help seeking and being proactive about more holistic well-being. So looking at those elements of lifestyle medicine, optimizing diet, mindful movement, minimizing stress and managing stress well, minimizing exposure to harmful substances, maintaining your sleep and positive and healthy connections. These are actually, no one's making money from doing these. There's every man and their dog who will try and sell you every pill, potion, or supplement saying that they'll make you feel better. But this is something that I've learned and always known in general practice, that when you look at humans, we want a quick fix. We want a pill for every ill. But actually, the importance of those foundations cannot be overstated. And there's no there are some studies happening, but big pharma aren't funding studies into these elements of lifestyle medicine. No one's making money if you go to bed on time and minimize your exposure to screens. And if you eat a whole food diet, mostly plants, no one's making money from that.
No, quite the opposite, in fact.
Well, and the interesting thing is when you look at sort of government policy, they're not actually even investing in it either.
Mm.
So we live in a world that is set to putting band-aids on boo-boos and fixing up the downstream effects. This is actually a huge cultural shift we're talking about. And cultural shifts don't happen in a tsunami. They happen in a million tiny moments and all these conversations where you have one person who goes, hey, you're right. And, that person will make some changes. And then they'll fall back into their old patterns. And if you're there saying, that's okay, we all do that. It's never too late to begin again. And it's just a million of these tiny moments of showing up and choosing what's right for you and knowing that if you mess up, that's okay. You're human. You're not that special. We all mess up.
Right.
Just try again the next moment.
I mean, there's also too clearly there's a structural component too, isn't there? So there's a certain way that the profession has been established. So I guess we can't ignore the sort of structural components. But I guess as more and more members of that profession start to prioritise their own well-being, then slowly the culture of that profession shifts.
Yeah, and this is that embodied well-being. Yeah, this is particularly coming back to general practice. We have lost that moment of having the family doctor, and without wanting to devolve into sort of policy discussions, there are huge policy issues around why that is. Not the least of which the funding model that Medicare supports. So there are big issues that need to happen on sort of a federal level to prioritise wellbeing and lifestyle medicine for all of us. This isn't just for high achieving people. This isn't just for doctors and healthcare professionals. This is that we need to live in the sort of society that prioritises slow medicine, which is not necessarily the quick fix stuff. It's all that lifestyle stuff that takes time. It takes conversations. And it takes repeated consultations where you can help get people back on track. And I mean, I was fortunate to have that sort of relationship with my GP on the day I burnt out. So I could walk in her door and she could take one look at me, having known me on every other day that I'd walked in there. She could take one look at me and go, right, this is not good. What do we need to do? And kick those wheels into action. But if I was going to a different doctor every time, I was dropping into, and I don't want to sort of fall into the trap of demonizing bulk billing. But when we look at how bulk billing incentivizes quick medicine, to make it financially viable, you do need to have those 6-minute appointments, maybe 10-minute appointments at maximum. You can't manage this kind of thing in a quick 6-minute appointment when you've never met this patient before. So what I see from the front end as a consumer of healthcare is that it's not set up to give me the medicine I need. What I see from the back end as a practitioner is that medicine burnt me out, and it's burning out many of my colleagues who either have to bill privately to make it possible to practice the sort of medicine they want, and then they know they'll have to cop all the vitriol that comes from charging appropriately for the time that they want to dedicate to patients. So you just you have to pick your heart the way the healthcare system's set up at the moment, and it's not always the best option. But I think as consumers of healthcare, we've all got a role to play, because if what I'm talking about resonates with you and you go, yeah, that's what I want, then you don't try and go to your GP or your GP practice and say, this is what I want. You need to go to Canberra. You need to go to your elected officials and you need to say, this is the healthcare I want and this is how I pay my taxes. This is what I want funded.
I'd really love to hear from you about whether or not your definition of what success looks like for you in your life has changed since you've stopped working in the way, or I guess post your burnout.
That's a great question. Yes, just unequivocally, yes. What I think makes me successful now is that deep sense of knowing that it actually doesn't matter what happens to me or, what appears in front of me in my life. I can deal with it. I just take it as it comes, and this is the essence of mindfulness. I have cultivated this ability to not time travel and, worry into the future and ruminate into the past. I can just be in this moment. And I know that ultimately I feel I have the skills, the knowledge, the support to deal with whatever arises. And I think for me, that is what I feel makes me successful more than anything else I achieve. It's that sense of inner resource and resourcefulness that really I feel it's success.
Mm, great answer.
Yeah. Wow. And so your days now, what do they look like compared to, is it still as varied as being a GP, or is it sort of
Oh,
calm? Is
yeah.
it calmer? Is it how would you?
I think one of the things I find really the most endearing about the work I do is when people say to me that we have a retreat or do coaching and they come back and they say, when I went back, nothing changed. Nothing changed in my life. The mess was still there, the stress was still there, but my ability to cope with it changed. So to me,
Yeah.
that's the sense that I'm trying to live. My life's still messy. Like
Oh,
the
yeah.
idea that I have this beautiful, calm life where the bin's not overflowing and the kids aren't making me run late for work. Like that's not my life. I've still got so many different things. I have a lot of a golden retriever puppy, I think is how I'd describe myself. I like new shiny things. I do surgical assisting. I teach. I run retreats. I do coaching. I help out at school, at the kids' school. Like I've got all these different moving parts. So my life is probably still as chaotic as it always has been, but my internal response to the chaos is just so different.
Mm.
That I think is the big difference in these
Yeah.
last few years is that the
Yeah.
chaos is all there. Life is really unchanged ultimately. The car
True.
still breaks down, all those things happen, but the inner chaos is definitely less.
Well, look, thank you so much. This has been
Yeah.
such a great conversation for us to have. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Likewise. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for your sharing what you've shared. It's not I'm glad I don't I'm sure it's not always easy to be so open about a very difficult time. It must take you back to some extent. And that's never pleasant to relive some of these things. But you sharing that story, it's certainly resonated with me. I'm sure it did for you too, Shayla. And that's the sort of thing that just resonates with other people. And hopefully maybe if they listen and go, wait a second, I'm feeling like that they do something, or, it's a very powerful story that you have. And I just want to say thank you so much for sharing it as openly as you have.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. It's been great to have the conversation. And I think you're right. I think the parallels are there between
Mm.
healthcare, between law, between so many different professions. And
Mm.
part, like I said, of this idea of being so fixed in my mindset, I remember a point where I was so convinced no one else could understand what I was dealing with. And I could have told myself very convincingly it was because I was a doctor. No one could understand unless they were a doctor. But what I'm learning and exactly what we're discovering here, this is human stuff.
Yeah, right.
This isn't medical stuff. This isn't law stuff. This is human stuff. And we're in great company. There's a lot of other humans around.
Yeah,
So
right. 100%.
Oh, she was great. And do you know what I loved about her? It's just that lovely kind of calming.
Mm.
Can imagine going to see her as a GP and feeling very looked after, couldn't you?
Right. Yes, 100%. And I'm sure that's why she was so busy.
Mm,
Yeah, yeah, her compassion is very obvious,
yeah.
and her empathy, but what great stuff she's doing, bringing that knowledge. Again, it's just such a shame, isn't it? I'm sure you feel that way, having gone through a similar experience yourself. It's a shame to have to get to that point, um, but then there's good things that have come from it in what you
Yeah.
can share ahead. It's kind of like the canary in the coal mine, isn't it, really?
Yeah. It's funny. I've spoken to a lot of people who've gone through pretty awful burnouts, and I've never heard anyone say that they wish they hadn't have gone through it. What they
Yeah.
say is, I wish I didn't have to go through it to learn what I've learned.
Right.
But given what I've learned, I'm glad that I went through it.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, she said the same thing. I think
Yeah.
that sometimes there's no other way out, which is terrible. It is terrible, but sometimes you got to go through it to get to the other side. Anyway, hopefully that was useful, Outlaws, to listen to that conversation with Dr. Emily Amos. If you enjoyed it, please let us know. Always connect with us on the social medias channels or contact us on our email, which is contact@outlawspodcast.com. Well, have a great week, Kate.
You too, Shayla. Thank you so much, everyone, and thanks for listening. And see you next week.
See you next week. Bye.
Bye.